Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf
Of our warriors. And paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have a good show for you this week. We have an interesting interview coming up. We're going to have our contributor Ben interviewed an expert on Russian aviation, so that'll be coming up right after. Of course, I present, as always, the news, and that'll be followed by our report from German aid to Ukraine. So we'll go ahead and jump right into the news for this week. These are the main news items as of December 8th, 2024. Ukrainian naval drones successfully targeted and neutralized Russian surveillance systems on gas platforms in occupied Crimea, as reported by Vice Admiral Oleksiy Nezhpapa, commander of the naval forces, on November 7th. These strikes are part of a series of operations targeting Russian assets in Crimea. On November 27th, Russia reported that Ukrainian drones had struck Belbek military base in Sevastopol. The following day, Ukraine destroyed a Russian radar station near Kotovsky, and as I reported last week, on November 29th, Ukrainian forces eliminated 3 additional radar systems. Ukrainian developers are testing a new type of hexacopter drone equipped with fiber optic guidance to counteract electronic jamming on the battlefield, according to a report by Militarny. Designed by eBanshee, a Ukrainian company specializing in heavy UAVs, these drones aim to improve battlefield performance in environments where electronic warfare and signal interference are prevalent. The innovative fiber optic first-person view system addresses a significant challenge for drone operators: radio signal jamming. Recent tests demonstrated the drone's capabilities, successfully navigating a 10-kilometer forested area without any loss of connection or interruption. The fiber optic system provides immunity to jamming and electronic warfare, which often compromise drones relying on traditional radio communication. Although the trials have been promising, eBanshee acknowledges that further refinements are necessary. Additional tests are planned and more fiber optic cables have been ordered for evaluation. Some of these cables will be sent directly to the Ukrainian military for real-world combat testing. Russian forces are intensifying their efforts in the Kherson region, attempting to secure positions on the islands and the Dnipro River Delta, according to a spokesperson for Ukraine's Southern Command, Vladislav Voloshin, speaking on December 4th. The attacks have focused on the Kozatsky and Krylik Islands, and it follows a warning from Kherson Oblast Governor Oleksandr Prokudin, who indicated that Russia appears to be planning a renewed offensive towards Kherson. Since Ukraine successfully liberated Kherson and adjacent settlements west of the Dnipro River in November 2022, the area has endured frequent Russian strikes from across the river. Prokudin reported that Russia has assembled a fleet of 300 boats for potential crossings, a claim corroborated by Voloshin. However, he emphasized that Moscow's attempts to establish a foothold have consistently failed, resulting in significant losses. According to Voloshin, the goal of the operations is to secure a strategic position and force Ukraine to allocate resources and personnel to counter them. Ukrainian intelligence indicates that Russian troops are training assault groups in occupied territories like Zaporizhia and Kherson, focusing on overcoming water obstacles and deploying landing parties. For the third consecutive month, Russia's use of Shahed-type kamikaze drones against Ukraine has reached unprecedented levels. Ukrainian Air Force data shows that in November alone, Russia launched 2,576 drones, a significant increase from the 2,023 deployed in October. The Russian president outlined plans to expand drone production nearly tenfold within the year and claimed that in 2023, the Russian military received approximately 140,000 drones. Ukraine faces mounting challenges from these attacks but has significantly improved its air defense systems, bolstered by advanced Western technology such as Patriot and NASAMS. While effective against missiles, the cost of deploying such systems against inexpensive drones is unsustainable. Therefore, mobile fire groups equipped with anti-aircraft guns, machine guns, and lower-cost rockets now play a central role in intercepting the drones. These are supported by an extensive network of sensors capable of detecting and tracking incoming threats. electronic warfare has become a key component of Ukraine's strategies. Techniques like GPS spoofing are used to misdirect drones by feeding them false location data, causing them to veer off course. According to Federico Borsari, a specialist at the Center for European Policy Analysis, Ukraine's layered defense strategy has proven highly effective, with only about 5% of Russian drones successfully breaching Ukrainian defenses. Russian President Vladimir Putin has appointed Alexander Khinshain, a State Duma deputy, as the acting governor of the Kursk region. The area has been partially controlled by Ukrainian forces since early August, necessitating what Putin referred to as a focus on crisis management. In a Kremlin-released video, Putin highlighted Khinshain's past role as an advisor to the head of Russia's National Guard between 2016 and 2018 and justified his selection for this position. Khinshain becomes the third individual to hold the governor's post in Kursk this year. The Telegram channel Farah Daily questioned Khinshain's qualifications for the role, describing him primarily as a public relations expert with limited relevant experience. Previously, he led the Information Policy Committee in the State Duma and authored Russia's controversial law banning, quote, LGBT propaganda, and contributed to the government's internet censorship efforts. Putin stated that as the region is gradually recaptured, the governor will be responsible for rebuilding affected areas and coordinating aid for residents. Khinshain replaces Alexei Smirnov, who has served as acting governor since May 2024 before officially winning the position in September. Smirnov reportedly stepped down voluntarily, citing difficulties connecting with local residents, according to the Russian Transport Minister Alexander Smirnov. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov confirmed Smirnov's resignation, stating that he will transition to another as yet unspecified role. On December 2nd, the Biden administration announced a $725 million military aid package for Ukraine. This marks the 71st tranche of U.S. support to Ukraine since August 2021, according to the Department of Defense. The details of the package surfaced earlier through leaks, a frequent occurrence with such announcements. The assistance includes ammunition for NASAMS, Stinger missiles, countermeasures against drones, artillery ammunition, HIMARS ammunition, anti-armor systems, UAS, unmanned aerial systems, non-persistent landmines, tow missiles, small arms, demolition, tools, spare parts, training, and logistical support. Ukrainian Finance Minister Serhiy Marchenko has formalized an agreement with the European Union for a macro-financial assistance package worth up to 35 billion euros. The initiative falls under the framework established by the G7 countries. The agreement is unique because the repayment of the loan will come from proceeds derived from frozen Russian assets within the EU. As a result, Ukraine effectively gains access to these funds without the burden of repayment. But the total assistance amount will depend on the contributions finalized by participating countries under the initiative. If the United States also follows through with its pledged $20 billion, the EU's portion of the package is expected to total around 18 billion euros, dispersed at a rate of 1.5 billion per month until 2025. To access the funds, Ukraine must fulfill 14 reform measures across several sectors. These include stabilizing macro finances, restructuring state-owned enterprises, improving public administration, bolstering the energy sector, strengthening the rule of law, advancing anti-corruption efforts, and enhancing their defense industry. Sweden and Denmark have signed agreements with Swedish defense manufacturer BAE Systems, Hägglunds, for the procurement of 205 CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles, with 40 units specifically designated for Ukraine. The Swedish government, in its press release, highlighted that the acquisitions aim to enhance security in Europe and directly support Ukraine's defense capabilities. The total deal, which is valued at approximately $2.2 billion, includes the delivery of 115 vehicles to Denmark and 50 to Sweden, replacing units previously sent to Ukraine. The remaining 40 vehicles will be newly manufactured for Ukraine, funded by prior Danish and Swedish donations. Finland also announced a separate aid package for Ukraine worth 25 million euros, which includes essential winter equipment for Ukrainian forces. Also, Denmark has delivered a second batch of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine as of December 7th. The first batch of Danish F-16 jets has already been deployed in Ukraine, and this latest delivery is expected to significantly improve their ability to counter air attacks. Zelensky expressed gratitude to the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, and her team, as well as the Danish people, for their continued support. SpaceX has secured a contract with the Pentagon to enhance Ukraine's access to a more secure, militarized version of its Starlink satellite network known as Starshield, according to a report by Bloomberg. The agreement will upgrade the connectivity of 2,500 existing Starlink terminals in Ukraine to the Starshield system, in addition to 500 terminals already using the service. Starshield is an advanced encrypted communication platform specifically designed for greater resilience against hacking and signal jamming, making it particularly suitable for military and strategic applications. The Space Systems Command Commercial Satellite Office confirmed that the combined agreements now provide connectivity to 3,000 terminals in Ukraine. The primary goal of the contract is to ensure stable and reliable internet access to Ukraine, crucial for both military operations and civilian communications. While the Space Systems Command did not disclose the financial details of this latest agreement, Bloomberg mentioned that prior contracts with U.S. European Space Command to provide 500 Starlink terminals was valued at approximately $40 million US. A Japanese robotics company, Cyberdyne Incorporated, is set to supply advanced wearable suits to aid former Ukrainian soldiers recovering from severe injuries sustained in the war with Russia. These robotic suits are part of Cyberdyne's HAL, Hybrid Assistive Limb series, designed to assist individuals in regaining muscular functions. It seems like all of their naming schemes are for evil robots, which is amazing. The initiative is funded through a Japanese government-backed project aimed at supporting Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. Cyberdyne secured a 360 million yen or $2.4 million US contract to deliver 46 suits under a project managed by the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA. These suits will be supplied to Ogawa Seiki Co., an electrical equipment manufacturer responsible for providing Ukraine with heavy machinery, rehabilitation tools, and medical devices under the same program. The HAL suits are expected to arrive at a medical facility in Kyiv by March of next year, and they will primarily support individuals with spinal cord injuries and other muscular impairments. HAL operates by detecting neural signals sent from the brain to the muscles, enabling users to perform movements such as walking or lifting objects, even with severely weakened muscles. Sensors attached to the skin surface capture these signals, allowing the suit to facilitate movement. Cyberdyne stated that its HAL technology is already in use in over 20 countries for rehabilitation purposes. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has approved over 1.3 billion euros in investments to support Ukraine's public and private sectors. The funding will be directed toward 8 projects aimed at rebuilding transport and energy infrastructure, promoting distributed energy generation, and enhancing energy efficiency. A portion of the investment will be provided as non-repayable grants. To facilitate increased support for Ukraine, the EBRD's governors approved €4 billion capital increases in 2023, bringing the bank's capital base to €34 billion. The expansion enables the EBRD to sustain significant investments in Ukraine's real economy, both during the ongoing war and in future reconstruction efforts. The United States has imposed new sanctions targeting a network accused of enabling Russian elites to evade international restrictions through digital assets. These measures focus on 5 individuals and 4 entities linked to TGR Group, an organization the U.S. government identified as a significant contributor to sanctions evasion. The list also includes a company based in Wyoming, partially controlled by an individual already under sanctions. The network allegedly exploited digital assets like dollar-backed stablecoins to bypass financial restrictions. Acting Deputy Secretary for Counterterrorism and Financial Intelligence Bradley Smith stated that this system allowed Russian elites to protect their financial interests while supporting the Kremlin. The activities attributed to TGR Group include laundering funds for sanctioned organizations, exchanging cash for cryptocurrencies without proper registration, converting cash into crypto assets for clients, issuing prepaid credit cards to bypass controls, and obscuring the origins of funds used by wealthy Russians to purchase property in the UK. The United States and the UK collaborated to dismantle the operation. Although the exact scale of money laundering remains unspecified, a 3% transaction fee suggests substantial sums. To recover £20 million confiscated by UK law enforcement, the network would have needed to launder approximately £700 million, quote, free of charge, implying total operations in the billions. Proceeds were reportedly linked to drug trafficking, cybercrime, and espionage. The UK reported arresting 84 people and seizing significant assets, including funds moved through cryptocurrency platforms and traditional banking systems. The scheme was active for several months and relied on collecting funds at 55 different sites across the UK, Scotland, and the Channel Islands. Couriers transported money from drug cartels and scammers, converting it into Tether cryptocurrency. These cleaned funds were then distributed globally. Some of the TGR-linked crypto wallets were connected to Garantex, a Russian platform sanctioned in 2022 for funding arms supplies to Russia's war in Ukraine. Aeroflot, Russia's largest airline, plans to acquire 5 Boeing 737 cargo jets from the Volga-Dnieper Group, a Russian cargo airline, to use them for spare parts. The jets, which are aged 21 to 22 years, are valued between 13.6 to 18.5 million each, according to sources cited by Kommersant and the Moscow Times. The aircraft are currently leased through Atran, a division of the Volga-Dnieper Group, with the leasing rights managed by Irish company AerCap. Aeroflot is reportedly working to secure the transfer of these leasing rights and settle insurance agreements. The airline initially planned to allocate the planes to its low-cost subsidiary, Pobieda. Industry insiders suggest that converting the cargo planes into passenger aircraft is impractical under the existing sanctions, citing high costs and technical challenges involved. Instead, Aeroflot plans to dismantle the plane for parts, including engines, landing gear, and avionics, to support its existing fleet amid restrictions on access to Western technology and equipment. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has also signed an €80 million loan agreement with Ukernafta, Ukraine's largest oil company, to address the country's energy and heating shortages. The project aims to install compact generators with capacities of up to 10 megawatts in Ukraine's western and central regions, areas currently facing severe energy shortages. As Ukraine's leading oil and gas producer and the operator of the largest network of gas stations, Ukernafta plans to use its own natural gas for power generation. The initiative is expected to alleviate the strain on the national energy grid. The loan will be supplemented by €22 million in investment grants, including $9.5 million from the Netherlands and $12.5 million from the United States. The contributions will be managed through the EBRD Special Fund. Angstrom, one of Russia's largest microchip manufacturers based in Zelenograd, has been declared bankrupt following a court ruling prompted by the financial claims from Zenit Bank. The bankruptcy decision, made on December 2, 2024, stems from a failure to pay 1 billion rubles, approximately $10 million, ordered by the court in 2019. Despite more than 6 years passing, Angstrom has not fulfilled its obligation. Initially intended as a cornerstone of Russia's microchip production industry, Angstrom was closely associated with Leonid Reiman, a former communications minister with ties to Vladimir Putin. The company had received substantial state support, including $1 billion in funding and €815 million credit lines from Russian State Development Corporation VEB in 2008. These funds were allocated to develop processors, smart cards, and electronic passports, with backing from both the Russian government and the Security Council. However, by 2014, the company had accumulated over 100 billion rubles, or $1 billion in debts, and ceased loan payments. Financial difficulties led to the cessation of its operations, as reported by the tax service. Currently, they are entangled in 108 enforcement proceedings amounting to around $1.5 billion and have unresolved legal disputes exceeding €500 million. And finally, this week we have headlines concerning international relations. A closed-door meeting took place in Paris involving U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and French President Emmanuel Macron. The unannounced gathering marks the second meeting between Zelensky and Trump this year, but the first since Trump's victory in the U.S. presidential election. The discussions occurred as international anticipation grows around potential peace efforts in Russia's war on Ukraine. The meeting is expected to address pathways to negotiate an end to the war and the future of U.S. military aid to Ukraine under the Trump administration. Trump arrived at the Élysée Palace as part of his first foreign visit since being elected. Before he engaged in broader talks, he held preliminary discussions with Macron, focusing on the state of global affairs and the war in Ukraine. Later in the day, Trump and Zelensky joined around 50 other world leaders at the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral. The historic ceremony, scheduled for 9 p.m., celebrates the completion of a 5-year restoration effort following the 2019 fire that heavily damaged the iconic structure. Russia has initiated a test program mandating biometric data collection from foreign nationals and stateless individuals entering the country for stays exceeding 90 days. The first phase, effective from December 1, 2024 to June 30, 2025, requires these individuals to provide fingerprints and photographs at designated entry points, including Moscow's major airports. The second phase, commencing on June 30, 2025, will allow travelers from visa-free countries to pre-submit their biometric data and photographs via a dedicated mobile application, streamlining the entry process. Exemptions to this requirement include citizens of Belarus, children under 6 years old, accredited diplomats, employees of international organizations, and their immediate family members. The Maltese government has reportedly revoked the visa of Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova, reportedly before the OSCE Ministerial Council meeting is set to take place in Valletta on December 5th through 6th. The decision, described as, quote, unprecedented by the Russian Foreign Ministry, comes despite the visa having been previously approved. Malta cited circumstances beyond their control as the reason for their cancellation. In response, the Russian Foreign Ministry announced that its delegation at the meeting would focus particular attention on the decision, while accusing certain Western nations of leveraging the OSCE for their own strategic purposes. Zakharova criticized the move, attributing it to what she called the scheming of the Western Hydra. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is also expected to attend the OSCE meeting in Malta, marking his first trip to an EU member state since the outbreak of Russia's large-scale war in Ukraine. Both Lavrov and Zakharova are subject to sanctions from the EU, the US, and the UK, making the circumstances of their travel to such events a contentious issue. And last item for this week, the Yale School of Public Health's Humanitarian Research Lab released a report on December 3rd confirming that Russia has been systematically and intentionally engaging in the coerced adoption and fostering of Ukrainian children. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, at least 314 children have been identified as part of the program, involving forced relocations, placements with Russian families, and listings in Russia's child placement databases. The initiative is orchestrated by Russian President Vladimir Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova, Russia's Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights, with the goal of assimilating Ukrainian children into Russian society. The report details that 148 of these children are listed in Russian child placement databases, with 42 already adopted or assigned guardianship, and another 166 directly placed with Russian citizens. The placement program intensified after Russia's illegal annexation of parts of Ukraine in September 2022, with many children held at temporary locations in Russia before being moved to institutions or placed with Russian families. The transportation of children was carried out using Russian military aircraft under Putin's direct authority. At least 67 children have already been naturalized as Russian citizens, although the report suggests that the real number is likely much higher. Recent legal challenges allow Russian guardians of Ukrainian minors to apply for Russian citizenship on the children's behalf while they renounce their Ukrainian citizenship. The report also mentions the separation of siblings, with nearly half of the children listed in the databases having known siblings, some of whom were placed separately. 80% of the children originated from Donetsk, with significant numbers from the so-called Luhansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic. These areas have been focal points for coerced child relocation efforts. Children were subjected to pro-Russia re-education in at least 8 institutions before their placement. Psychologists played a role in matching children with Russian families, giving the program a facade of legitimacy under the guise of mental health needs. Russian databases operated or coordinated by the federal government later restricted or altered information on Ukrainian children, often removing details following the International Criminal Court's issuance of arrest warrants for Putin and Lvova-Belova in March 2023. And that concludes my summary of the main headlines for this week. We will now move to the next segment.
Yeah, that would be me. Hello guys. Last week I sadly couldn't attend the stream, but now Shady's back, which means I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. I'm sorry, last week I made a joke about Arnold Schwarzenegger and saying I'll be back. And so yeah, I just had to do it. However, nearly nothing noteworthy has happened, which is why I only have a mini segment for you today. As you know, Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited Ukraine on Monday and presented a package consisting of military equipment worth over 600 million euros, which is to be delivered to Ukraine in December. However, as you probably also know, nearly everything mentioned as part of this package was already pledged before, so it's not new aid. One exception to this is the announcement that Germany will deliver additional Patriot launchers. At least we didn't know about it publicly. Could be, of course, that they pledged it to Ukraine in private, but we didn't know about it publicly. I also inquired with the Dutch Ministry of Defense to check if this is somehow connected to their delivery of 3 additional Patriot launchers, which was made public just days ago. However, a spokesperson told me that the German pledge had nothing to do with their delivery, which is very great news. This means that Ukraine will receive at least 2 additional Patriot launchers. We don't know the exact amount yet. I will, of course, report on that later. In December from Germany, after having received 3 additional Patriot launchers from the Netherlands just a month prior. And yeah, that's already it for my segment. Back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, German aid to Ukraine. So, thanks everyone for tuning in. Hopefully, you enjoyed the news. First, I would ask everyone if you could please hit that like button down there. It really does help us out. It helps spread the word about good old Tochnyi. Now, we do have a website, tochnyi.info, as you guys probably know. We have a lot of published material there. There's a lot of very detailed information now about Russian military production, Russian, manufacturing, Russian military organization. There's all kinds of databases on different types of strikes, and man, there's so much information on the website now. So head on over to tochnyi.info and check out all the great work of our researchers. Some of them, we can't wrangle them on the stream to talk to you guys, but they do contribute a lot. So you got to go dig it up on the website. We'll do our best though to get them on to talk about it when possible. And then, also if you could check us out on Twitter and Blue Sky. Those are the 2 main platforms that we kind of promote our work on and kind of update people on. So you can kind of follow us there if possible. Also, though, we're not really super strong on any other platform. So if you want to spread the word about us, probably people haven't heard about us there. So we appreciate you guys kind of spreading the word on social media and promoting us on YouTube. It really does help us out. We're a pretty scrappy organization. We're not well liked by the algorithm because we cover a very difficult subject, and understandably, they're very wary to monetize things like that, and so that means they want people to watch things they can monetize, right? So a lot when you guys show like really strong. One thing we've had in our favor since the beginning is you guys have been really strong supporters of what we do by liking and subscribing and all that. So the people who do follow us and support our work have been like really helpful, and we're really grateful for that. Anyway, from there, I'm hoping Mr. Erlend, are we ready to go on the old interview there?
Yeah, I'm ready to select the video. Unfortunately, the aspect
Excellent.
ratio is a little bit off. I don't know why. We're gonna have some internal washing up to do with myself, and and a tool called Handbrake. But the interview is really, really good.
Yeah, it's a long thing. Like basically on the platform we're using Restream, which is amazing. There's like some limitations. The file can't be more than an hour and it can't be more than 2 gigabytes. So we were like, oh, we'll just compress it and do this and that. And I don't know, we couldn't quite get it to work perfectly. But the content's good. So please check out the interview. The interview is with our good contributor, Ben. So a lot of people don't know what Tochnyi is. If you ask them like, what's Tochnyi? They'd be like, I don't know. But if you were like, hey, did you see that chart with the Russian sovereign wealth fund? They'd be like, oh yeah, I saw that, right? So Ben is the guy who made that chart. Ben is an economist. He's a founding member of Tochnyi. He's one of the earliest contributors, and he is an economist who I think has a unique perspective on Russia because he studied, like, as far as I understand, like medieval Dutch economics. And so I think he doesn't think in terms of a lot of the ways that like modern economists do. And I think that's probably a better way to approach the Russian economy. So Ben always has really interesting interviews, and he has a good way of getting information out of people. And he always has interesting guests that he likes to talk to. So this week, Ben is back for an interview, which is a rare treat. I'm very pleased to introduce this. So Ben spoke with Stanimir Dobrev, who is one of the foremost experts, open source experts available on the Russian aviation industry. So you guys heard in my news report that Russia is currently like buying cargo planes to cannibalize so that their passenger airlines don't crash. We're basically that segment. We're going to get into a lot more detail with Ben's discussion. So I think we probably set it up adequately. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Erlend, who will hopefully start the video. Mr. Erlend?
Man, it's loading.
I
Oh
stole
my
as long as
God.
I could.
Oh, why does
Well,
this have to
Mr.
happen with
Erlend, do we
me?
have any articles coming up? Are we working on anything for the website?
Oh well, always something in the pipeline, but nothing is ready to be published yet. Why isn't it opening? Oh no. Well, okay, trying again. So I want to say I'm very, very happy though with Artem's article being cited in The Economist this week. So The Economist did a piece on mostly autonomous FPVs, but they did include a paragraph about how important FPV drones have been in countering Russian surveillance drones, and they used our data. So that's cool.
Yeah, very cool. Second time we've been cited in The Economist as an organization, so very pleased with that. Of course, all the credit goes to Artem, who did all the research and did all the work. And yeah, I don't know, Tochnyi, we do our best to promote work from researchers like Artem to try to get, basically to make that happen, where like he does a lot of really important research with open source information, and then it's pretty clear, like you can just follow it and have the because you show your work, it's easy for journalists to follow up on it and check it out, and as a result it's useful for the journalists to, like, if we promote their stuff, the journalists will read it and then they will translate it for a wider audience. That's kind of what one of our goals at Tochnyi, right, is to take this more esoteric research and kind of boil it down into useful and accessible quantities and forms, so that media organizations and policymakers and also the wider public, like our wonderful audience, do that. So yeah, it's kind of I don't know. We're always pleased to see that happen, and we're really especially pleased because Artem, we know Artem worked really hard on that. So, Mr. Erlend, how are we looking?
Yeah, I had to refresh and it worked. So we can play the video. And I guess I'm just gonna hide us and let the audience enjoy. This is a really, really interesting
Yeah,
interview.
it's good.
So, yep, let's go.
Enjoy, gang.
And go. So we are not live, but we're recording. So thank you very much, Stanimir, for joining us for Tochnyi Weekly. We're going to have a discussion today about the Russian civil aviation and its present state, both about the planes themselves and the companies, and how it's doing as a sector. It's going to be, I think, very interesting, a little bit technical, but we like that. And so, first of all, welcome on board, Captain Stanimir. We're very, very happy to have you.
Thank you for having me, but I'll stick to a civilian rank. Just Stan.
All right. So first of all, I wanted to start with both a simple at the same time a very difficult question. If I am in a Russian plane, if I'm flying a Russian plane today, every day of the year, what is the probability of me being alive in 1 year?
The probability of you being alive should be higher than you expect, given the question, but some types have already started having more problems. They're not flying planes that are as unsafe as people think, but for example, the recent problems with the SSJ-100, it has had its number of incidents increased twofold since 2021. And that's because it's a plane that's dependent on Western parts. The engine is partly built by France, and they're currently having issues that no other plane has within Russia, even the Western ones. Like, for example, they have issues with their fuel filters, which is a rare issue. A pilot
Okay.
can know which plane is having an issue just by hearing the issue in this case.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So we're not talking about planes falling out of the air on a regular basis as of yet, but problems. All right. So to be a little bit more serious at the beginning, can we have a general understanding of aviation? I come from a relatively small European country where if the planes don't work, it's no big deal. You just take the trains. But I've got something telling me that Russia, being a country that's spread over 11 time zones, there may not be in such a situation. So, what's the importance of planes and plane travel in Russia at the moment?
Well, Russian plane travel is much more important than, for example, than the small country you mentioned, for the issue that the distances are quite big, and during the winter, some areas don't have another way to actually travel to the rest of the country. There are over 400 routes of Russian airlines that are subsidized by the state. That is a major part of airline travel. Russians can get tickets from, let's say, Kaliningrad to Moscow for a few hundred, not even a few hundred, a few dozens of euros, because the state subsidizes those routes. It also subsidizes routes from the Far East to the center of Russia, again, for the same reason. They need to have some connection to the rest of the world. Otherwise, in winter, these places are completely isolated. And even in the summer, because of the lack of reliable roads and highways, it can take you days to travel to the center of Russia on those roads.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess on the contrary, contrary to the US, where even though plane travel is very important there as well, they have this thing where, well, if you're in LA, you can still go to San Francisco or wherever by road or by train. In Russia, there's one center and all the rest is connected to that center. So plane travel is maybe even more important than in other large countries that we might think about. So that's a general overview. Thank you very much. So we're talking about something really, really important. So what sort of planes do they have? And how do they produce them at the moment?
Well, at the moment, they actually don't produce them. That's part of the issue right now. They're focusing on two main types and a few auxiliary ones. Maybe we can say that there's a third main type of an airliner. So what they're focusing is on the SSJ-100, but it's now going to be called SJ-100, with the domestic production of engines and domestic production of composite parts. There's the MS-21-310, which is going to be the main airliner that they're going to build, but they shifted production to 2025. That's where it's going to start. There's also the Tupolev 214, which is supposed to be built in Kazan, but again, due to delays, they haven't built a single plane since the start of the more intensive part of the conflict in Ukraine. And for the regional planes, because they have a lot of routes, like I said, from the smaller towns in the Far East, they have regional planes like the An-2. So they're going to be replacing that with the Baikal plane, which is, again, a small plane that's going to be developed within Russia, but it has missed the deadlines to come into production. And
Stan, I'm sorry, just to interrupt you 1 second. Those planes you're talking about, what are they like? Main liners, or are they much smaller, like compared to a European or compared to an Airbus or Boeing? What would they be like?
I think you can compare the MS-21 to the A320, the Airbus A320, and the SJ is more of a smaller regional plane, but again, with more than 100 people on board. While the Baikal plane is that's a smaller regional plane with 12 people in terms of seating for passengers.
Okay. And those cover all the routes in Russia, or are the longer routes done by larger planes? Like if you go from, I don't know, St. Petersburg to I'm blanking, to the Far East.
Chita, for example, in Zabalkaysky Krai.
For instance.
Yeah. So they cover, the MS-21 is supposed to cover up to 90% of the routes in Russia. So it has to reach a range of 4,000 kilometers. Although according to current rumors, I think it's limited to 2,800 kilometers, and some sources say it's even lower than that, 2,300 to 2,000 kilometers range. But that still is 70% of the destinations that Russian airlines travel. So yeah, they're supposed to cover almost everything that they travel to.
Okay. So sorry, I should interrupt you there just to get an idea of the size. So there's three main planes, a largish one, a medium one, and a smaller one, and they're all facing either delays or significant limitation in their capacity. But that's the, so how many, like, what's the present situation? Is there any, just to be clear, is there any plane coming out of the factories at the moment?
No, at the moment they're not. There was supposed to be two. That's why I mentioned the Tupolev 214. It was supposed to come out this year. They were supposed to build, let me get the notes, 7 in 2024 and 10 in 2025. Now that was reduced to 1 in 2024 and 4 in 2025, but even that wasn't met. They failed to build a single plane this year.
Okay. And those plans, they were drawn in 2022 following the main invasion, or were they already in existence and just supercharged in 2022?
Well, they had a plan to build by 2040 1,800 domestic planes. They were going to be mostly SSJ-100s and MS-21. 342 SSJ-100s and 990 MS-21s. That was based on the requirement of Russian airlines at the time. Now that plan was initially made in 2021, and it was optimistic because at the time they still had access to Western composites and engines. All of these planes were designed with Western engines, Western parts. That's why they were going to build them quickly. That's why, for example, there were already 230 SSJ-100s built, and right now they can't build a single one with domestic parts. The requirements came from the large Russian airways, like Aeroflot wanted 400 MS-21s. Red Wings, which is the airline owned by Rostech, wanted 100 SJs-100s and 204 MS-21s. For example, S7, which is the largest private airline, wanted 125 MS-21s and 25 SJ-100s. That was the initial plan. The problem was that once they got sanctioned out of all of those Western contracts for delivery of parts and delivery of engines, everything slowed down. They revised the plan in June 2022, and they were supposed to start delivering planes, completely ready to fly planes, in 2023. Now that didn't happen at all. So now we're in the third revision of the plan that happened in 2024, which is down to 994 planes, and deliveries are going to start in 2025.
Okay, so what you're telling us is, so what they had was a long-standing plan that got turbocharged in 2022 when there was a whole thing with the leasing of the planes that were not returned. They decided that, okay, we cannot, whether we want it or not, the usual planes and the usual parts are blocked for us. So we want something like several hundred planes, and they're always having to push them back. So when was the last time? When was the third time the plan was pushed back?
It was pushed back several weeks ago. That was when the head of Yakolev and the head of Tupolev both were resigned or sacked, depending on how you look at it, as well as a few sackings that are going to happen probably in the Ministry of Transportation. For Tupolev, the reason was simple. They couldn't build a single plane, so the plant manager had to go. For Yakolev, it was the problems with the planes that kept growing and growing. So, for example, the SJ-100 doesn't have a working engine still. It was sent back to revision. It's called PD-8. It was sent back to revision in December 2023 when, during ground tests, it started to rip itself apart with the paddles flying all over the place. That's at least what the Kommersant sources say.
Okay, and just to be clear, that's not good, right?
Oh, no, you don't want that.
Okay.
Especially in the air. It's bad
Right.
in the ground, it's even terrible, it's even worse in the air. And it also, something that I have to mention back to the plant, they're on a clock. So what they're operating is 738 foreign planes and around 240 SSJ 100s. Now, those foreign planes by 2030, even in their most optimistic plans, are going to be reduced to 390 planes because the engine life is going to run out, the parts are going to wear off, and they're not going to be able to repair them and fly again on those planes. So they have a real deadline that's going to hit them somewhere between 2030 and 2035. That's when they're going to run out of all of the spares and available resource for their Western planes. Unless they replace all of those planes, and here we're talking about close to 900 planes, they're not going anywhere. They're not flying.
Okay. So yeah, very important. There's a time bomb behind them, which it's relatively, 10 years is still quite a long time, but in the most realistic way, how many planes can they produce every year?
Well, the plans are to produce 22 MS-21s in 2026, 46 in 2027, and 72 in 2029. But a recent audit that was made on the aviation industry, because it's mostly controlled by Rostec, showed that because of limited component suppliers, there are key components of the planes which are supplied by only a few companies, the bottleneck is closer to 6 MS-21s per year. If these bottlenecks are solved, the production will only increase to 12 MS-21s a year in 2026. So they're going to build only a handful of planes. This is what's happening right now.
Oh, okay. So what you're telling me is that the time bomb you're mentioning is, can I put it? It's not 2035. It's more like 2028. And if by 2028 they're not already producing 30 or 40 planes per year, they will be short of planes anyway.
Yes.
Okay. So because when you were saying 2035, I was like, oh, that's pretty long ultimately. But if they want to be fully self-sustaining, they need to have all their shit in order by 2027, 28, in order to have the time to produce the replacements for those planes that are not going to be available. Because you said they were going to lose like about 300 planes by 2035, and if they cannot produce at least 50 a year over the next 6 years, they won't be able to meet that demand.
Well,
right.
They're going to lose actually 419 planes out of 700. So they're going to lose more than half of the planes they operate.
Okay. And okay, so 490, if we give them like 7 years on average, that's in excess of 50 planes or 60 planes per year that need to be produced from 2025 onwards. So they're facing anywhere between a sizable problem and a complete catastrophe.
Yes,
already right now.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Excellent sense.
there are issues right now with planes that have accelerated their issues. So, for example, S7, the private company, operates something like 39 Airbus A320, 321 Neo. Now, those planes have newer engines. They're either built with the LEAP engine from the French or with the Pratt & Whitney 1000G. And these engines, these engines have a mean time between overhauls of 2.5 years to 1.5 years. And because they can only be overhauled at official plants of the two builders, they're grounding them. So right now, out of the 39 planes from the Neo type that S7 has, it's flying only 8. 31 are grounded.
Okay, but can you let me ask you something?
Yeah.
The Russians are famous for sort of a rough and ready approach to mechanics. You hit it there, you add a condom here, and the thing flies. And then there's the famous case of the F-14s, I think, from the Iranian Air Force, which after, I don't know, 40 years are still flying, whereas they should have been down by any measure and not be able to fly anymore for the past 25 years already. So isn't there a possibility for them to, go like, okay, the hell with the official guidelines, we'll just make the thing fly ourselves?
No, the best they've done is managed to repair parts of the CFM 56 5B engine and 7B engines that is on the older A320s and 737s. When it comes to engine technology, it's much more sophisticated than that. And if we look at the Iranians, they have been rationing their flights with the F-14s. They don't use them every day. A mainline airliner has to be used, if it's profitable, 8 hours a day. That's not something they can do with these engines at this state. They can't repair them. They can't even fix small issues with them. They're just grounding the planes and moving engines around.
Oh, of course. There's a large difference there. Makes a lot of sense. Thanks. So sorry to have interrupted your flow, but I think those precisions were quite important for the knobs like me to understand. So we are now in a situation where Russia had to produce a lot of planes. They're on a time. They're on there's a time bomb. Which they're almost have missed it already. You've mentioned the engines quite a lot. So the main problem for them is the engine, or is it like more thorough than this?
The main problem is the engine, but it's not just the engine. So the engines are a big problem, as the engines they're producing are usually underpowered. They take longer to develop than they hoped. And they're putting some restrictions on the planes which are not normal for 2024. So for example, the MS-21 currently is limited to a max flight altitude of 7,000 meters, which is weird. Its engines can't carry it far enough, so that's why we have a reduction in the destinations that they can reach. But also they have problems with the materials for the planes. So the same MS-21 now with Russian composites is 5.75 tons heavier than the previous version with foreign components, which lowers the useful weight quite a lot. That's as if you're carrying a full plane just to take off without the passengers.
At the same time, that would be very Russian. We have a functioning plane. You wanted a functioning plane. We have a functioning plane. Yes, it cannot take passengers, but you never mentioned it had to take passengers. All right, that makes sense. So they have those 3 planes that they're trying to make fly. Are there any other issues that they're facing at the moment, either with their historic fleet or with their fleet in production at the moment?
So like I said, they are facing issues with the SSJ-100 in terms of double number of incidents compared to Western equivalents. Again, we've only had 1 fire so far of an engine, but we've also had a crash of an SSJ-100 which was being tested after it was overhauled by the producer, and it crashed in July 2024, I believe. So they have some problems. The other thing that they have as a problems for building the planes is they can't find skilled workers. So they're starting to offer over 200,000 rubles for skilled workers with benefits, including like paid rent, paid food, that sort of stuff. And they can't find workers. And regions that produce these planes, like for example, Tatarstan, have a very low unemployment. Tatarstan has a 0.17% unemployment according to their own local data. It's very hard to find skilled workers. And what I've been doing over the past 10 years before 2022, they were downsizing the aerospace industry. So the Minister of Defense that everyone wants to talk about in the 2000s, that they called Taboretkin, he was placed in charge of the optimization of the processes in Rostech. And what he started doing was meticulously cutting labor. So cutting people everywhere to lower the costs of the plants. And now when they have to ramp up this production for these plants, they can't find the workers anymore. They've been retired, they've been forced out of the plants and don't want to work there anymore. There are bitter feelings. And these plants, because of the old age of the workforce, need, for example, with Kazan, they need 2,500 skilled workers by 2027 just to cover the current rate of production.
Oh, because of the people leaving the factories.
Yes, they have a demographic crisis.
Oh, nice. Yeah, of course. That couldn't be that simple. Okay, and the other phase, like what about, so labor is not great, but what about capital? Are they managing to get well, first of all, the machines? How do they get the machines?
Well, initially for the plan, there had to be 1 trillion in spending for this big plan. And
rubles, 1 trillion rubles, $10 billion.
Yes, more, because we're talking 2022 when they started the plan initially. So we're talking about 284 billion rubles from the National Welfare Fund. That seems dubious right now. 381 billion rubles in bank loans that were supposed to be subsidized. So they're more manageable than the current rate of 25-26% that people are taking on loans at. 123 billion rubles, which were funds from the companies that were actually going to invest in the project, the actual Rostech subsidiaries, and 215 billion rubles from the budget. Now, when they did an audit of the entire plan, and the audit was specifically done not by an airline company, it was done by a company that put in trusts. So it was done by Gazprom Neft and Sberbank. It's a very weird situation in Russia that banks are auditing plane companies, but this is the level of trust with the Kremlin you need to have to do such projects. So the estimate they came with, because of the rising costs and the ambitiousness of the plan, is 18 trillion rubles by 2040. So the costs are hundreds of percentages more than what they initially had in mind. And I don't think they have the funds to cover that at this point.
Wow, 18 trillion rubles?
Yes, 18 trillion rubles.
Okay, so even with today's exchange, that's 180
$billion.
billion dollars?
Yes, just for the
Wait.
aviation industry.
Okay. So the overall of the aviation industry, probably over 10 years, but regardless, would be more than $100 billion. I'm trying to come up with an example. What is $100 billion? That's twice the defense ministry budget for 2024, if I'm not mistaken.
I have to look at the figures, but it is larger than it, yes, significantly.
Okay, so they need to make absurd amount of money flow, but that's not only to produce new planes. That's to fix the whole industry, right?
Yes, but also to produce new planes, because there's a trick here. So the Russian government has a figure at which they want the planes to be sold. So for the MS-21, initially it had to be sold to airlines at 3.2 billion. Then it was raised to 3.6 billion. Now the problem for that is that it actually costs 9 billion rubles to produce. So the government has to cover the difference between the sale price they want and how much it costs to produce.
Okay,
And
they want to sell them for $35 million, but they cost $19 million to make. So there's a 60 million or 50 million gap between the two, which is going to be covered by the government. Sounds like excellent business.
Yes, if the government does that for them, yes, but it's unlikely. Now, the other problem is that the audit also found out that there is a high risk that the price to build it will actually go up beyond 9 billion. So it's going to go to 11.5 billion rubles for that plane. For the SSJ 100, or SSJ 100 that they're calling it now, it was going to be sold at 2.4 billion rubles. That's what the state wants, but it costs 5.4 billion rubles. Again.
Okay, there's so many numbers flying, but yeah, basically it's the taxpayer that is keeping the industry afloat, but let's say the industry in the air. And if it wasn't for absolutely massive input of money, there would be no way to do this. How long is this sort of money expected to be spent? Are we talking 3 years, 10 years?
We're talking about 2040 was the 18 trillion figure, but even by 2030 they're going to have to spend trillions if they're going to keep up with the plan.
Okay, so basically they're expecting 1 trillion rubles, $10 billion a year to be spent on this one.
Yeah,
this or double this, somewhere along those lines.
If they start building the planes at the rate they want, yes, even over that.
Wow. The implication being, of course, that if they don't produce the plane fast enough and if they don't sell them in numbers that are sufficient, but they still need to cover the fixed cost.
Yes.
And they won't be able to spread them over such a number of planes, and the result would be that each plane will be so much more expensive. So
yes.
the $30 million price tag is probably not going to move much. What is going to evolve is the amount of money the government has to spend per plane for it to be sold. That's amazing. I had no idea it was that bad. Like that makes almost every other government in the world look extremely competent. All right. So shall we stay on the subject? Like, should we stay there, or do you want to move on to your next point?
Oh, we can cover also some more things on the planes themselves, because we haven't covered the final plane that's critical for Russia, because it has a lot of small airports in a lot of smaller towns, which during the winter are isolated. And right now they're flying things like An-2s from different areas, which are carrying just 10, 12 passengers, but that's also critical. Or for example, Mi-8 helicopters are being flown as part of regional airlines.
Oh boy. And so what do they want to replace those antics with?
They have
They want to replace them with the Tupolev?
No, the Tupolev is a larger plane. It's more in the class of MS-21. No, what they have is a plane called Baikal. Now, it was originally developed development started earlier in the 2000s. By 2019, they had a price tag of 120 million for a plane. So it's relatively cheap. By 2023, they had increased the price to 178 million. So it's still a relatively cheap small plane. The problem is its actual cost to produce was 500 million rubles. Again, the same problem we see before.
So tell me again, they're selling it for
1/3 of the price to build.
All right. Yeah, that sounds like an excellent business plan.
And it's still not ready to be built because it was using a Western engine, so they had to replace the engine with a local one they had to develop. Now, Putin did intervene because the plane had other deficiencies. Like it could take off only from 1,000 meter runways, 1,050 meters. So it had to take off from shorter airports. And Putin intervened. He said the magic word, and magically the plane was delayed back a few years, but now it's going to take off from 350-meter runways, and it's going to cost only 260 million. And I don't expect that to be true. I'm expecting, okay, maybe they can work on the takeoff, but I'm expecting that, again, the government is going to cover a lot of the costs for this plane. Now here there's another twist. There's a development of the An-2, which is called the TVS-2MS. It's flying with a Western engine. They can re-engine it, but it's already in production. They have 25 built, as far as I remember. But because the Ministry of Transportation and Rosaviatia picked Baikal, and that is their boy, they're going to cancel that project. They're going to stop the certification process. They're going to bury them in bureaucratic red tape just so that doesn't go ahead and doesn't receive money to change the engine, so it's not a competitor for Baikal. These are some things that happen within Russia where a certain industry within it, a factory, has more sway with the government than another factory, and it can just destroy the other factory.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks. I guess that's one of the interests of this interview, is that on top of, well, knowing about this very important sector, we also get to understand better how the system works as a whole, and that's a super interesting observation point for us. So yeah, the story of the force plane is different, but the same. Well, the result is pretty much the same. Okay, so. Yeah, the numbers are absolutely dizzying at the moment. So, did you want to as well talk about the airlines, or are they in a completely different category?
Well, I think we should first cover the engines because they have serious problems there as well.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, let's go for engines.
So they've recently downgraded their plan for the production of engines from 192 engines, so almost 200 engines in 2025, to 128 engines, which includes 50 PD8 engines, and that engine isn't ready. Like I said, it was sent back for redesign in December 2023. Now, the problem with the engines is if you compare them to Western engines that they're already using, that's very easy for the PD8. The engine that the SSJ 100, the French one, is using costs 600 to 700 million rubles. The new engine costs $1 billion. So again, 30% more expensive. When we go to the engine that the MS-21 is going to use, the PD-14, now that engine is double the price of the Western competitor. It costs 1.8 billion, while the equivalent Pratt & Whitney engine costs 800 to 900 million rubles. And there are further problems. So for example, Western engines have a service life of 40,000 hours. And in this case, we're talking about the CFM 56. When it comes to the initial flight hours that the engine life of the Pratt & Whitney of the PD-14 is going to be, it's 3,600 hours. So in 2026, those engines will be put on Russian MS-21s. They will fly for a year, and they'll have to be sent back to the factory to be changed or get a new engine, because the engine is not mature enough. It has to work through its issues to increase the service life, and they expect that by 2030 they might get to 12,500 hours in terms of engine life. Again, we're far away from the 40,000 hours worth of engine life for the tested Western engines. And the final engine for the Tupolev, it has it's an engine that they already use. They have some understanding of it, but it has a service life of 6,000 hours. It hasn't moved beyond that. So again, we're talking about a reduction in the engine life of these planes in orders of magnitude. So they're not just going to hit the brick wall where they're not building enough planes. They're not going to be operating them as much as Western planes because they have to keep re-engineering them, keep servicing these engines, and keep changing them at a rate that maybe the plants are not going to be able to cover.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Thanks a lot. That's really helpful. That changes my perspective because I barely ever consider planes. I never fly in one. So the result is I'm thinking always either the plane flies or the plane doesn't fly. But what you're telling us is that in this case, the problem is not so much that whether the plane flies or not, is when the plane flies, the country as a whole, the companies, everyone involved is just hemorrhaging money. And this is going to bring them down, like much more than what's at stake is much more than just the plane. It's the health of the budget, it's the health of some of their largest companies, and it's the health of the system as a whole. Well, thanks. Perspective changed. That's super helpful, Stanimir. Thanks a lot. Do you have more bad news about the engines, or do you want to move on to something else?
Well, we can talk a bit about the airlines themselves, because I think we've covered what I have on the engines. We'll have to get into more detail. For example, that the current engines that they have, they can't actually service them well. So they can do some repairs on the CFM56 engine. So the low pressure turbine, the low pressure compressor, and some of the hot parts of the engines they can repair, but the entire engines, they can't repair them. And the other thing is that Russia uses 800 of these engines right now, of this type. So what they've managed to accomplish in terms of repair is 12 major repairs from October 2022 to May 2024. So if you have 800 engines and you repair 12 engines for a year and a half, you're not looking good.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I'd like to make clear, I'm not repairing them. I don't know why you're accusing me of not looking good. I am not the one repairing them. That has nothing to do with me. No, jokes aside, so the production of the engine is problematic. The maintenance of the engine is problematic, and even when they manage to do the maintenance, it's too slow and expensive. That doesn't fly. Talking about flying, so yeah. Now let's move on to something that, well, it's consumer facing, so in a way we know much better, which are the airlines. So first of all, everyone knows Aeroflot, but is there? And you mentioned Red Wings. Are there other airlines, and which one do you think are the most interesting to look at?
Well, I think the most interesting to look is the private one S7. Because it was the most innovative. It took over parts of the Trans-Aero fleet back when that one went into bankruptcy, and it's managed to do the most in terms of repairs of Western engines, more than every other airline in Russia, including more than Aeroflot. However, like I said, they're facing a big problem. Their entire fleet of Neo planes is going to be grounded by the end of next year, at least. That's 49 planes out of a company that has a few hundred planes. It's not something that they can afford to lose. And it's 10% of the entire foreign-made fleet of Russia, those Neo planes. They also had to cut costs and reduce their flights. So before that, they had a big center in Sheremetyevo, in Moscow. That was where their HQ was. That was where they were operating from. They were operating a lot of flights. Over the last 2 years, they've had to change their headquarters to Novosibirsk. They've had to reduce their staff in Moscow. And they've had to fly a lot less routes. And in this case, their routes were cannibalized by Aeroflot, because Aeroflot can get money from the government to pay off leases of planes. Aeroflot gets subsidies, and Aeroflot can outmuscle a private company within Russia in terms of flights. So basically, they have reduced operations, and because they're so reliant on Western planes, and they might not be the first receiving Russian planes to replace them, they might be the first one going out of business, because they are expecting that the entire Russian fleet, because of the engine issues, is going to be grounded within 5 to 7 years, and they're going to be hit hard. And that's the domestic competition in terms of private airlines. That's the biggest example.
Wow, that's a great example, because the result is basically their most effective, less least politically dependent airline is the one that's going to be hit first, precisely because, well, they didn't need to invest in contact with the higher ups of the political system, because they just needed to invest in good managers and good engineers and whatnot. And as a result, that is going to bite them in the ass. It's very depressing. I mean, all right, it's positive in one way, but it's also very, very depressing.
Yeah.
So basically, what you're telling us is that there's a sort of re-Sovietization of the airline sector, if we want to put it simply.
Well, it's going to go towards, yes, the government companies. And for example, one other thing that's going to help them is that there's a state transport leasing company. And it also operates airplanes in a form of leasing that's managed by the government, and it's doing work in terms of covering issues where there's not enough private enterprise. Now, what they're going to do is they're going to place orders for planes in terms of the production of planes that are not going to be wanted by the airlines. So the airlines, Aeroflot, for example, doesn't want anything to do with the SJ100. It wants just MS-21s, nothing else. That's the only plane it wants. So what the state leasing company is going to do is going to buy 132 SJ100s, 65 Il-114, and 41 Tupolev Tu-14 aircraft. So even though these are not good planes, even though these are not well-performing planes, even though that even the government company doesn't want them, they want to produce demand for it artificially to keep the production lines for those planes open, even though they have issues.
And isn't this company, this leasing company, isn't it the one that is owned, at least in part, by the National Wealth Fund? Or am I mistaken?
Yeah, it's partially owned, yes. And it's the government company, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Again, you can stimulate demand if you throw money at the market. Now, if they're going to have money to throw it at the market at that point, that's a different question, because these aircraft are not yet produced. But that's the idea. Things that people don't want will buy them anyway.
Wow. And so, all right, so that's for Aeroflot and S7. And just silly question, we've been talking about airlines. Are there any airline in Russia that is not geared towards passengers, that is more, freight or any other, like the transporting mail or things like that?
Well, the Volga-Dnepr airline, which operates the larger An-124s, it's I think, again, state-owned, but it's focused entirely on freight. That's the biggest example. They have such airlines, yes. They have smaller ones with smaller planes, but they do have airlines that are focused entirely on transporting cargo. And for a while, they were doing good business with Europe. For example, France needed it to maintain its presence in Central Africa for its operations. That was actually the logistics of the French there, part of the logistics, because it had a big enough transport fleet that can carry a lot of cargo. And that was the way they were supplying their operations. Now that's over because France pulled out, and they're not going to make deals with Volga-Dnepr, but that was one way that airline generated enough revenue for the Russian budget.
All right. So I've got a few more questions. But the main one now is that you hinted at the question of international flights. What's the situation right now? If I'm in Istanbul, can I board a Turkish airline flight to Moscow or not?
You can board a Turkish airline flight to Moscow, but the Turkish airline flight to Moscow will have a more expensive flight, because as part of their effort to raise money to repair their airports, they're raising the fees for air navigation services. So foreign airlines have spent 87% more on air navigation services, something like 1 billion. It was 1 billion, but now it's 660.5 billion rubles have been spent from foreign companies for those services. That's part of your ticket. And that's how they plan to repair their airports, because they're in a state of disrepair.
Okay, but conversely, are there Russian planes flying abroad or not?
Yes, they are. Like we saw with the flight to Antalya, it was a Russian airplane. Now they spent a lot of money, I think hundreds of billions of rubles, from the National Welfare Fund to pay off leasers of these part of their fleet. That's why they managed to expand their foreign routes again and reached the level of pre-2022. They're still not at the level of before COVID, but they've expanded their foreign flights, yes. Again, with money from the budget, because Aeroflot in 2023 was operating at a serious net loss, I think over 100 billion.
All right, but but potentially they have a plan that those foreign flights are going to generate the revenue necessary to pay for whatever the domestic flights are going to require, or is it impossible?
It's impossible to cover the domestic flights. No, that comes directly from the budget.
Okay, so maybe they will end up making some money from international flights, but that's peanuts compared to what they need. But those are still flying.
Yes.
All right. So just to be completely clear, would you say this is potentially the best example of sanctions, international sanctions working against Russia at the moment?
It's one of the better ones. For me, the best one is Novatek with LNG, which is forced to to consider changing its business from a gas exporting company to a fertilizer exporting company, just because it can't export LNG and it can't do new LNG projects. But this is one of the closer ones, yes. They just don't have an alternative without Western technology and Western engines and Western planes. Their industry isn't catching up and costs are mounting. Even on the domestic things, costs are mounting. For example, the domestic Mi-8, some of its parts that they have to buy for these domestic flights with helicopters are 230% more expensive than they were in 2022. Now that's an entirely domestic helicopter.
Oh, wow. And just to get a general idea, we've mentioned a lot of numbers, but out of the budget, be that the national or the regional budgets, how much is Russia spending to keep its airplanes in the air at the moment every year? Like a yearly sum, what would it be?
That's harder to calculate because, for example, there are over 40 billion in subsidies for subsidized flights. There are direct one-time payments like the 300 billion that Aeroflot got for Aeroflot and other airlines got to pay off leasers, and there's trillions going into the aviation industry just to keep it building. So it's harder to pinpoint, but they're spending several hundred billion a year at least. That's not returning into the budget.
So we're several hundred billion. All right, so we're looking at $2, $3, $4, $5 billion a year just to keep the airlines flying, which is significant. It's very significant, especially in time of war. But it's not absurd. It's not an absurd number in itself either.
But it piles up because when those planes start to be produced at those plants, it's going to go up astronomically because they haven't had to. This year they have less expenses because they haven't had to buy off leasers and they haven't had to buy new planes that much. Next year it's going to hit, and the year afterwards is going to be even worse.
Okay, and of course, what we're saying now is that at some point they're going to have to make a choice. Either the planes are flying, or there's some extra tanks in trying to fight in Ukraine, but they won't be able to have both. What would you say is the likelihood of them going for the tanks over the planes at some point, or are the planes always going to be a necessary option for them, and they will have to relinquish the tanks?
Well, I have to say that they're not spending that much on tanks. They're spending more on planes than on tanks. Tanks, because they're mostly being refurbished from storage, okay, those still cost almost as much as a new tank, but over the years, the Russian ground forces have been neglected relatively compared to other industries and other parts of the armed forces. They're still going to spend on planes. That's something they've decided. That this isn't going away. Now, the only thing that is impacting them is that some of the supplies are going preferentially to the military aviation and not to the domestic civil aviation. but they are going to spend on planes. That's been decided.
Okay. And just to elaborate on this military v civilian aspect, do you see a lot of cannibalization by one from the other, or are they're fairly different?
No, there's a lot of cannibalization. Part of the reason that there are going to be so few planes produced for the civilian aviation is because the military side is taking over the production capacity of the firms that are delivering the components. That's one of the big problems.
All right.
And also, I have to add that there is a cannibalization when it comes to labor. Like I said, they're offering more or comparable to the amount of money that the Russian military is offering for recruits. The companies are okay. They don't have a huge sign-up bonus that the government is offering new recruits, but they're offering similar salaries.
Yeah, of course. Which, by the way, that's my usual thing. It reminds everyone that we should really try to find a way to have less Russian engineers and skilled workers in Russia and more elsewhere. That's neither here or there. Okay, Stanimir, you've been absolutely fantastic so far. You've enlightened me at the very least, and I hope the listeners for already 45 minutes. I swore to you that we would not go further than 1 hour, but I do have one last question for you.
Okay.
And it's about I would say the elephant in the room, but it's more of a panda, really. Can China come in and save the Russian aviation?
No, that's not an option. China has an entire list of Chinese companies waiting for the delivery of their own Chinese domestic airliner, and that domestic airliner currently, because the Chinese engine isn't ready, is flying with the same LEAP engines that the Russians can't service on their Airbus A320 now. Those engines are sanctioned. The moment China even transfers one plane, they're in a heap of trouble because they need to use those French engines right now on their airliners. So that's completely out of the question. And plus, they have over 1,000 orders already placed for their domestic airliner. So the queue is several years ahead if Russia tries to place an order right now. So that's out of the question. Maybe China will decide to screw over its own domestic state airlines and send a few planes to Russia. Okay, but I don't think they're going to rework their entire schedule just to fix Russia's airline problem. And they're not going to be able to send more than a few planes because after that, the supply of French engines will stop.
All right. Okay. Well, that's great. Thanks a lot. Do you need to finish, or is it over? Do you have parting words?
Well, we can still go over another issue that's happening with the Russian aviation.
With pleasure.
Which is the tiniest out of all of them, I assure you. But Russian aviation is primarily insured by Russian companies, as you know, because no one else will touch them. And right now, the premiums are 20 to 40% less than the claims for this year. So basically, Russian insurance is operating at a loss insuring Russian airplanes. For example, Alpha Insurance, which is part of Alpha Bank's financial group, has earned from insurance premium a small sum of 1.28 billion in premiums for 510 planes that it insures. But in 2024, it had to pay so far 1.9 billion rubles. So over 50% more than actually they earn from premiums. So that's another thing that will go up. Insurance premiums for airline insurance will have to go up by 25-30% in 2025 at least. Now, the good thing for Russians is that insurance premiums are not that big a part of airline tickets. They're going to go up by maybe 1% or something like that. But that's also something to watch. They can't cover these costs. And as part of the insurance and as part of the maintenance costs, those have gone up 2-3 times since 2022. So Aeroflot now spends 40 billion just to maintain its aircraft fleet. In 2022, it spent less than 10.
Wow. Well, then that meshes in perfectly with the well, the way I wanted to conclude, but I'm not quite sure the conclusion I want to make, so I'll leave it to you. From the Russian point of view, is it better if their planes are flying or not flying?
From the government point of view, they have to have civil aviation. That's non-negotiable, the way they've set up their plans and budgets and how important that is to everything. Like, for example, recently Putin publicly humiliated the first deputy prime minister, Manturov, and Manturov is one who oversees the domestic substitution programs and the import substitution, and is the person who's going to oversee this with the airplane production. They also fired people from the airplane plants. That's not going to have an effect, but that means that they're looking. These were high-profile firings that hasn't happened in other sectors. And Chemezov, Putin's friend, is on maybe thin ice right now, because he's tried to publicly talk about how the interest rate is hurting Rostech, and there has been no response from the government. No one has done anything. So he might have lost the favor of the Kremlin because of this. And the Kremlin didn't want the airline to audit itself and get the results. It specifically asked for Sberbank, which is their golden boy, and Gazprom Neft, which is run by Mueller, who will never betray Putin's favor, to actually investigate the airline production. So it's a critical issue for them. They want to fly these planes. Is it good for the Russian budget? No. This is a premium luxury that they've decided they're going to have, but illogical premium luxuries sponsored by the budgets is something that authoritarian regimes have.
Amen. Fantastic. That's the perfect conclusion. I couldn't have asked for anything better. So before giving you the actual last word, I forgot to mention when I introduced you that you have one of the best Blue Sky accounts around. You're the one doing all the reading of the Russian economic press and releasing long threads every evening, like an absolute stud that you are, like halfway between Superman and a monk. And for this, I am eternally grateful, and for your extremely clear and detailed deep dive into the Russian aviation, I am even more grateful. So thank you, Stanimir. I'll give you the last word.
Oh, thank you for having me. And one last thing we forgot to mention about Russian aviation. Like all other industries in Russia, it has to raise salaries. So that's another cost next year. Aeroflot is raising salaries by 30%. That's just how they have to deal with inflation to keep air flight crews with the company.
Well, all right. That's, again, perfect. Thanks a lot. I'll end the recording, and I hope Joseph and the boys are going to be able to take it from here. Thanks so much, Stanimir, and everyone, have a great evening.
Thank you to Ben, and of course, thank you to Stanimir. He is, as Ben mentioned, on Blue Sky, doing excellent work. So do check him out. We'll put his handle in the video description, and yeah, maybe send him a message like that you saw his interview, and on Tochnyi, and it was good. if you appreciated it. Erlend, anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just saw that there were a couple of questions, but since none of us really are informed about this, I just suggest you go on Blue Sky and message him there, or tag him in with a question. I know that he posted that he was going on the broadcast, so you can probably ask him questions under that post.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, so we're certainly not equipped to talk in any detail about the Russian aviation industry, but he certainly is. So you can feel free to drop him a line if you had any questions. And then I think we just wanted to cover one thing, because it would be a little weird if we didn't cover it at all. There, of course, have been some developments in the Syrian civil war that has been going on. I wouldn't say that Tochnyi is going to be any kind of go-to source for information about what's going on in Syria. It's not really our area of expertise. We have, some open source people that we do our best to sort through information from. but the truth is, yeah, we're not really going to get accurate stuff on the ground there. That being said, it does certainly affect the situation with Russia being supported by Russia. So, or the Assad regime being supported by Russia. So, we just wanted to kind of update on like the current situation and how it might affect things. So, as of now, as far as I understand, and maybe Erlend can correct me if the rebel forces have entered the capital of Syria. They have entered the presidential palace. It seems now, I don't think there's any direct confirmation yet, but it seems like it's pretty much confirmed that Assad has left the country. I believe Assad has mentioned that, Russian authorities have mentioned that he's in Moscow and he will step down and discuss some kind of a peaceful transition of power or something to that effect. But there hasn't been actual, there's like one image going around that's old that they're saying that's him in Moscow, but that's not true. It's an old image. So there's no actual confirmation of all this yet, but like it seems pretty much like that has happened. Like state agencies have said these things. And so, yeah, the rebel forces have taken the capital, and they've captured enormous amounts of Russian equipment. There are still Russian forces in the country, primarily, I believe, like PMCs, like Wagner and other groups like that. And they're effectively, I don't want to say trapped, but like, they're sort of surrounded by rebels, and there doesn't seem to be a clear plan to get them out of the country. Or, rebels might be a negative term, sorry to use, but they're surrounded by hostile factions from the Civil War, and they are, they're sort of, it seems like they're sort of at the mercy right now of these hostile forces. So we'll see kind of what happens with Russian forces in Syria. But I would say overall, it's just kind of a giant disaster for Russian military and security institutions. And it represents a major loss of equipment and possibly a significant loss in personnel. Erlend, is there anything you wanted to add about the situation in Syria right now and how it affects kind of Russia?
Well, to not go too much into what is happening in Syria, because that's not really what we're covering here. I wanted to say that this will affect first and foremost their operations in Africa and their capabilities of projecting force in Africa. And that has been one of the ways they're also making a lot of money, and also a lot of money off the books that they put in the various banks in some shady countries, etc. So on the long or medium to long term, it will be more difficult for them to access all of these nations where they have some sort of interest in. Specifically, they've been very involved in supplying weapons to, for instance, Sudan, Mali. Mali, there's of course a very large Wagner operation that has been going on, and also in a lot of the other countries. There's a significant connection in Libya that has been very important for Russia recently. And the reason for why this is going to be more difficult for them now is really because they don't have any place where they can transit their flights through. So, yeah, it's going to be difficult or merely impossible to continue the operations in Africa like they have done until now.
Yeah, so like if I understand you correctly, right, you got a flight from Moscow full of like, AK-47s or whatever for Africa. You got to stop and refuel somewhere in between. And Syria was a nice place to do that because they didn't ask no questions, right? And now they don't have that. So that's the issue, right?
Yep. And of course, this being military flights, or not all of them, they also do some shady stuff with shell companies leasing Antonov aircrafts with former Russian Air Force pilots. There was one shot down not too long ago in Sudan, actually, which was smuggling weapons off the books as well. So they do both these more official operations where they're actually flying military aircraft, but to the illegal operations that are using these shell companies. And Syria was a perfect base for those flights, and that's now gone, and will definitely affect them long term, even medium term, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. It's a pretty significant blow to Russia in terms of it's something that they've invested a lot of blood and treasure in over the last decade or so, keeping the Assad regime propped up. And yeah, I mean, this represents a pretty significant, I would say, shocking to them failure in terms of their policies. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Erlend, any last words on that?
Well, of course, it's also a big problem for them not to have a warm seaport in the Mediterranean anymore. The Black Sea is pretty much cut off, and most of the fleet is not operational anymore, or has been chased away from Crimea or even Russian ports. I think the last port now is in Georgia, if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong. So their warm port facilities are withering away, to say it mildly, and without even having access to the Mediterranean through the Black Sea, that was the last warm seaport the Russians had, which was in close. So they won't be able to project as much force in the Med, which is important for them.
Yep. Couldn't have happened to couldn't have happened to better guys. I don't know. It's just a joke. Yeah, no, but we think it, as Erlend said, it represents a pretty significant blow to Russia's ability to project force out of their borders, and I think we certainly welcome that. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. As already mentioned, follow us on the social media, like our streams. Follow us on YouTube. We always do. We try to do interesting interviews, like Ben did with our colleague here. And please do check out our website, tochnyi.info. Thanks to Ben. Thanks to our guest. Thanks to Erlend for always holding the fort down. Thanks to German Aid to Ukraine for always providing his report. And yeah, we'll see everyone next week. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.
On behalf of the brave.